The maitre d' offered only a fleeting look in my direction before dismissively shaking his head. I regret to inform you, madam, that we do not have a reservation listed under your name. I blinked, briefly disoriented. That can't be done. I received an invitation to dine with my husband's family. They ought to have arrived by now. He offered me a courteous yet resolute smile. I have just verified. There is a booking for 6 under the name Morgan Sinclair, but I regret to inform you. A piercing, recognizable voice sliced through the dialogue. Ah, Claire. Morgan's voice echoed, laced with a playful delight. Did you honestly believe I would invite you to dinner tonight? I glanced over to find my mother-in-law positioned a mere few feet from me, adorned in her typical designer attire, her platinum blonde hair impeccably styled. Seated behind her, my husband, Adam, remained rigid, his eyes flickering between us, clearly uneasy yet silent. Next to him, his sisters, Charlotte and Emma, exchanged whispers, their lips curling into smirks. A knot formed in my stomach, yet I was determined to keep it hidden. I don't understand, I stated, my tone steady. Morgan's grin grew broader. Oh, darling, I never expected you to show up. She laughed lightly, as though I had provided some sort of entertainment. This gathering is a family dinner. A location such as this is. Well, it seems a tad beyond your reach, wouldn't you agree? Perhaps a more affordable dining option would be a better fit for you. Charlotte chuckled softly behind her wine glass. Emma averted her eyes from mine. Adam. He remained seated, his fork tightly clutched in his hand. Quiet. The burden of humiliation enveloped me, the judgment hanging in the air so dense it was almost suffocating. Other guests started to take notice, their intrigued gazes shifting toward the developing scene. This was something I should have anticipated. For years, Morgan had consistently conveyed that I would never measure up to her expectations for her son. I wasn't born into wealth like she was. I did not go to renowned educational institutions. I didn't come from their world of privilege. Ever since Adam and I became engaged, Morgan has made it her mission to constantly remind me that I was an outsider. Initially, it was understated. The subtle jabs regarding my uncomplicated preferences. Her tendency to overlook my invitation to family gatherings was quite striking. The lavish presents she would bestow upon Adam, while offering me nothing more than hollow smiles. However, this evening, she elevated everything to an entirely different plane. This was all part of her plan. She orchestrated a lavish dinner for my husband's family at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, making certain I would be left at the entrance, feeling like an unwelcome outsider. She reveled in each moment, savoring the experience fully. The shame should have seared. I ought to have felt insignificant. Yet, in that moment, a realization sparked within me. A smile graced my lips. A measured, intentional smile that caused Morgan's expression to waver for a brief moment. Without uttering a single word, I directed my attention to the maitre d'. Could you please request the owner to step outside? I inquired, my tone fluid and assured. Morgan chuckled softly. Oh, come on. Do you honestly believe the owner of this establishment will emerge simply because you requested it? I faced her once more, holding her gaze steadily. Absolutely. What about the owner of this restaurant? He understood me deeply. In just a matter of moments, my dear mother-in-law was on the brink of discovering a lesson that would remain etched in her memory forever. Morgan's smirk remained steadfast, yet I could perceive it. A subtle glimmer of uncertainty in her gaze. For years, she made me feel like I didn't belong. However, this evening, she had transformed her playful antics into a scene of sheer embarrassment. And she had accomplished it in the presence of my husband, his sisters, and a bustling restaurant filled with patrons. The atmosphere was dense, charged with expectation as I held my position, determined not to concede to her. The maitre d' paused, visibly uncertain about how to respond to my request. Just as he was about to reply, a resonant voice sliced through the atmosphere of unease. Is that you, Claire? As I pivoted, Daniel Laurent, the proprietor of this elite venue, came into sight. A man in his early 50s, Daniel embodied a sense of refined elegance. With salt and pepper hair, a tailored suit, and an air of confidence that radiated from owning one of the city's most coveted dining establishments. Morgan's eyes flickered with surprise as she took in the intensity of his gaze directed at me. Not with rejection, but with heartfelt kindness. "Is that you, Daniel?" I welcomed them, my grin growing broader. "It has been some time." His eyes darted towards Morgan, then to Adam and his sisters, before returning to me. "Indeed, it has. What has drawn you to this gathering this evening?" I motioned to the table where my in-laws were seated, their faces transitioning from lightheartedness to a more ambiguous demeanor. "It seems I wasn't part of the reservation," I remarked with a hint of humor. "Perhaps a slight lapse in judgment, don't you think?" Daniel's gaze deepened, sensing the hidden meaning behind my words. In an instant, a courteous smile graced his lips. "That simply won't suffice." Morgan let out a derisive laugh, her arms folded defiantly. "Oh, come on, do you honestly believe this restaurant can just accommodate her? This is an exclusive dining venue. One doesn't simply stroll in and anticipate a table waiting for them." Daniel's expression was a complete enigma. "Indeed, you are correct, Mrs. Sinclair," he replied with a polished demeanor. "This establishment does not accommodate last-minute walk-ins." A wave of disappointment washed over me, yet before I could utter a word, he shifted his attention to the maitre d'. "However, Claire is not someone who just strolls in. She is part of our family." The whole table came to a standstill. Charlotte's glass almost tumbled from her grasp. Emma's gaze flickered back and forth between me and Daniel, her expression one of disbelief. What about Adam? His grip grew firmer on the silverware. Yet, he remained silent. Morgan, on the other hand, was not one to retreat without a fight. She released a laugh tinged with disbelief. "Relatives? Oh, this is delightful. It seems there has been a misunderstanding. Claire is my son's wife, and I can assure you she has no connections to—" "Actually," I interjected seamlessly. "Daniel and I have a long history together." Morgan squinted, her gaze sharp and focused. "In what way?" I leaned in a bit, my voice raised just enough for the patrons at the adjacent tables to catch a glimpse of my words. "Prior to my marriage to Adam, I was employed in the fine dining industry." "What about Daniel?" "He served as my guide." A heavy hush enveloped the table. Morgan began to speak, probably to object, but Daniel interrupted her with a smile that failed to illuminate his gaze. "Claire is far more than just a former employee." He spoke with a serene demeanor. "She apprenticed with me right after graduating from culinary school. I took it upon myself to impart all the knowledge she possesses regarding hospitality and premium service. She was among the finest students I have ever encountered." Morgan's jaw clenched. Things were not unfolding as she had envisioned. The understanding began to dawn. Despite her attempts to undermine me, she remained unaware of the history that shaped who I am. A history that now threatened to unravel her entire performance. I had more to say. I glanced at the maitre d', who remained uncomfortably positioned at his podium. "I trust that Daniel's assurance will suffice to secure me a seat." The maitre d' promptly stood tall. "Absolutely, Miss Claire. I will ensure the staff sets up a table immediately." Morgan's face flushed with a hue I had never encountered before. "This is utterly absurd," she muttered quietly to herself. "Are you seriously saying she receives preferential treatment simply because of her past employment with you?" Daniel let out a soft laugh. "No, she receives special treatment because she has deserved it." The maitre d' gestured for a waiter, who promptly approached and started arranging a setting at their table, positioned directly beside Adam. "Oh, I'm accustomed to it," a subtle astonishment. "It appears that there is indeed ample space available." Morgan's hands clenched into tight fists on the tablecloth. "This is utterly ridiculous." I leaned in a bit, softening my voice so that it was just for her ears. "It's truly ridiculous that you believed you could belittle me and escape the consequences." Her nostrils widened. You're being overly theatrical. I merely shrugged. I'm savoring a delightful dinner with my family. Isn't that what you were hoping for? Just as she was about to respond sharply, Daniel gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. I'll arrange for the chef to prepare something unique for you, Claire. Morgan almost gasped in disbelief. Is there something extraordinary? Daniel beamed with delight. Complimentary, naturally. Morgan was filled with a quiet fury, yet she found herself powerless to act. Adam, remaining quiet, extended his hand toward his drink. Yet, I noticed a glimmer of something in his expression. Could it have been a sense of relief? Shame? Regret? I had my doubts. Yet, I was acutely aware that this dinner was only just getting started. What about Morgan Sinclair? She would soon realize the folly of believing I could be brushed aside so effortlessly. A freshly polished silver plate was set before me, accompanied by an exquisite amuse-bouche. Something exquisite, thoughtfully composed, and wholly flattering, thanks to Daniel. What does Morgan's face convey? Raw, unrestrained fury. Oh, I whispered, lifting my fork and deftly cutting through the dish with a familiar grace. This appears to be absolutely stunning. I took a bite, relishing the moment. It wasn't merely the flavor, but the exquisitely charged stillness that ensued. Across the table, Charlotte and Emma shared cautious looks. Adam remained silent, fixated on his wine glass as though it contained the solutions to his dilemmas. Morgan, on the other hand, was not one to embrace defeat with ease. She savored a deliberate sip of her wine, then set the glass down with a bit more emphasis than intended. Well, she remarked, managing a strained smile. I guess it's to be expected that someone of your caliber would have connections with welcoming atmosphere. I raised an eyebrow. Service industry? Morgan gestured with a hand, pretending to be courteous. Service sectors, such as waiting tables and kitchen roles. This isn't quite the type of profession we're used to in our family. Ah, there it lay. The true motive behind her elaborate ruse. It wasn't merely about leaving me out of dinner. It was a moment that served to remind me, in front of the crowd, that to her, I remained merely a woman who had clawed her way up from nothing. I savored another sip of wine before I replied. It sounds like you're implying that's a negative aspect. Morgan's eyes shimmered with a hint of intrigue. Frustration? Perhaps a touch of unexpectedness? She anticipated that I would be shaken, yet I remained unfazed. That's no longer the case. I merely intended to convey, she continued, that it must have been quite a transition for you, joining a family like ours. Her tone was airy, yet the words oozed with superiority. And what about Adam? Calm. Stated. Silence prevails. I shifted my focus to him, observing how he avoided my gaze. And that's when it dawned on me. This extended beyond merely his mother's harshness. This centered around his quietude. This was not the first instance in which Morgan had attempted to bring me down. It occurred during our wedding, when she conveniently overlooked inviting my family to the rehearsal dinner. It occurred during Christmas, when she presented me with a cookbook named Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife in front of a whole gathering of people. It occurred last summer, when she made a cutting comment about how lucky I was that Adam had decided to take a chance on me. And each and every time Adam had chosen to overlook it. I had convinced myself that it wasn't worth the struggle. I wished to avoid being the source of discord. However, this felt unique. This was more than a mere passive-aggressive remark. This was a calculated effort to bring me shame in front of others. And he had allowed it to unfold. I placed my wineglass on the table, the action measured and intentional. I leaned in a bit, placing my elbows on the table. Morgan, I said, my tone calm and steady. Are you aware of the distinction that exists between us? She tilted her head, a spark of curiosity dancing in her eyes despite her better judgment. A smile crept across my face. I put in the effort for everything I possess. A piercing, bewildered hush enveloped the table. Morgan's expression grew steely. Beg your pardon? I remained completely still. Did you catch that? I sensed Charlotte tense up next to her mother. Emma pursed her lips, a hint of amusement flickering in her eyes. Morgan let out a derisive laugh. Are you suggesting that I haven't put in the effort to achieve what I have? I allowed the question to linger in the atmosphere. Before she could craft another dismissive reply, I interjected, I didn't marry into wealth. I was not born into privilege. I crafted my professional journey from the very beginning. And yet, I motioned toward the table. Here we are, gathered at the familiar restaurant, savoring the same dishes, enjoying the same level of regard from the owner. Morgan's fingers tightened around her napkin, her knuckles pale and tense. Charlotte and Emma had fallen silent. What about Adam? He appeared as though he wished to disappear beneath the table. For the first time since meeting Morgan, I noticed a fleeting expression cross her face. Something she often concealed with great skill. It wasn't frustration. It was trepidation. For years, she had endeavored to persuade herself that I was out of place. I felt diminished. That I was merely a fortune seeker who had attached myself to her son. But what about now? At this moment, she began to uncover the reality. And the reality was that I was not someone she could shatter. I grasped my fork, effortlessly slicing into my meal once more. Oh, and Morgan? She let out a sharp breath through her nose, unmistakably angry that I had taken charge of the discussion. Excuse me? I smiled, with intention and care. Exercise caution in your judgments of others. I took a bite of my meal, savoring it as I chewed thoughtfully, then added, you never know who might find themselves in a position of power over you. The atmosphere at the table was thick with unease. Morgan, typically composed and fully in command, sat with a stony expression, her fingers gripping her wine glass so tightly that I almost anticipated it would break. Adam appeared as though he wished to sink into his seat and vanish. Charlotte and Emma exchanged furtive looks, their eyes dancing with unspoken words. Clearly contemplating whether to step in. What about me? Never before had I felt such unwavering confidence in my position. It was evident in Morgan's expression. The moment her meticulously crafted facade of superiority began to falter, even if only briefly. She had never encountered such a challenge before. She had crafted her influence through the art of persuasion, compelling others to submit to her desires. Regarding individuals who are either too fearful or overly courteous to correct her behavior. However, I no longer felt fear in her presence. Morgan inhaled deeply, steadying herself before setting her glass down with a gentle yet purposeful sound. I understand. She spoke at last, her tone unexpectedly silky. I suppose I ought to commend you, Claire. You have successfully risen above your situation. I savored another sip of my wine, refusing to grant her the pleasure of a response. But do share, she pressed on, her lips forming a sweetly deceptive smile. If you pride yourself on your independence and self-sufficiency, then why is it my son who is financing your way of life? I took a moment to stop. Charlotte emitted a soft gasp. Emma adjusted her position, feeling a sense of unease. What about Adam? Adam recoiled. Morgan's smile became more defined. She sensed the gaze of the table upon her, all anticipation for her reply. I placed my glass on the table, each motion measured and intentional. Could you clarify what you mean by that? I inquired, pretending to be perplexed. Morgan leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a sardonic whisper. Well, my dear, it seems that my son is the very reason you're able to enjoy that charming little boutique position of yours, wouldn't you agree? You don't truly have to engage in work, yet you feign the existence of a professional life. How delightful. She tilted her head, a self-satisfied smile creeping back onto her lips. You speak of independence, yet ultimately, you're still someone my son takes care of. And there it lay, her last card. The affront was designed to degrade me irreparably. The ultimate strike to remind me of my position. I allowed the words to linger, observing how Adam continued to avoid my gaze. The way his sisters paused, anticipation hanging in the air, as they awaited my downfall. And then, I chuckled. Not a slight, bashful laugh. A hearty, authentic laugh. Morgan's smirk wavered. Excuse me, is there something amusing happening? I set my napkin down on the table again, a smile still lingering on my lips. It has come to my attention just how disconnected you seem, Morgan. Her gaze sharpened. What did you say? I motioned to Adam, my tone steady and measured. Do you believe he stands by me? I inquired, raising an eyebrow. How charming. Charlotte emitted a sound reminiscent of choking. Emma's lips parted in astonishment. What about Adam? Adam's complexion drained of color. Morgan's smile vanished in an instant. What are you referring to? I let out a soft sigh, feeling a twinge of sympathy for her. Do you still view Adam as your little boy? The one who holds the reins. The supplier. The man who saved me from my humble existence. I inclined my head. However, I must share something with you, Morgan. This is not the way our union operates. Morgan tensed. Do you want to hear something amusing? I pressed on. What about Adam's business? What about his investment projects? Half of them were financed with my funds. A profound hush enveloped the table. Morgan's eyes grew large with surprise. Her whole universe transforming before her eyes. Excuse me? She murmured softly. I smiled, yet this time it lacked any warmth. Adam's journey to success was not a solitary endeavor. I pressed on, maintaining my conversation with her while my eyes remained fixed on my husband. At the moment he decided to embark on his investment journey, he found himself lacking the necessary funds. I lifted my wine glass once more. However, I did. Morgan's fingers danced with anticipation. That can't be done. I simply shrugged. Embrace your own beliefs. However, the truth is that your son's achievements are founded on my contributions, my approaches, and my backing. Charlotte and Emma turned their gaze toward Adam, seeking his affirmation. However, Adam? Yet to utter a sound. Remaining motionless. I shook my head in disbelief. You believe you can belittle me by portraying me as a helpless little homemaker? That's utterly ridiculous. What's the truth, Morgan? Adam relies on me significantly more than I rely on him. Morgan's face flushed a vibrant crimson. I reclined, folding my arms across my chest. You've dedicated all this time to making me feel as though I don't fit in. Yet, I have been the one sustaining this marriage, and consequently, your esteemed family name, above water. Emma appeared as though she might faint at any moment. Is that you, Charlotte? Utterly at a loss for words. And what about Adam? At last, Adam spoke up. Claire. He rasped. Perhaps we ought to. I raised a hand, interrupting him. No, Adam, I stated, my tone resolute. Perhaps we should meet right now. Not after you remained silent while your mother attempted to humiliate me. Morgan gazed at him, coming to the unsettling realization that her son, her shining star, was utterly lacking in courage. And then, out of nowhere? Her pride in him seemed to have faded. For the first time, she regarded him as if he were insignificant. As if he fell short of her expectations. As if he had let her down. A delightful twist of roles. I rose to my feet, carefully adjusting the fabric of my dress. I believe I've reached the end of my journey here. Morgan's nostrils expanded. It's not as simple as that. I glanced over at Daniel, who had been observing from a respectful distance. Daniel, it was a pleasure to see you. I appreciate the warm welcome. Daniel chuckled, clearly entertained. It's always a delight, Claire. Then I turned my gaze to Adam. Are you joining us? He paused, his gaze shifting between me and his mother. In that instant, clarity washed over me. I was fully aware of his next move. Since Adam had never selected me in the past, he had no intention of beginning at this point. Morgan beamed with a sense of victory. What about me? I returned the smile with warmth. What she remained unaware of was, I had already made my decision, as well. And shortly? She would soon realize the folly of attempting to assert dominance over me. Because I was on the verge of revealing to her, and Adam, just how formidable I truly was. Adam chose not to follow me. I was caught off guard by his actions. Upon exiting the restaurant, the refreshing night air caressed my skin. Yet, it hardly registered with me. My thoughts were keen. Lucid. This dinner served as a much-needed awakening. A pivotal moment that had been long anticipated. What comes next? The moment had arrived to take action. I took out my phone, my fingers poised as I crafted a message. Myself. We are progressing ahead. Begin the process at the very start of tomorrow. In mere moments, the reply arrived. Legal professional. Got it. The initial draft of the divorce settlement will be ready by noon. I let out a long breath, my gaze fixed on the screen. Separation. The term didn't frighten me. What unsettled me was the duration for which I had overlooked the reality. Adam had always been against me. For years, I found myself isolated within the confines of my own marriage. However, that is no longer the case. This evening marked the decisive moment I had been waiting for. And what about Morgan? She was completely unaware of the extent to which I was about to disrupt the carefully curated life she had fought so hard to manage. I reached home ahead of Adam, allowing me just the right amount of time to take care of what was necessary. Initially, I entered the home office. The one utilized by Adam for his investments. As I turned the dial, the safe creaked open. What is the passcode? It remained untouched by change. An error. Within lay all the financial documents. Financial documents, asset management records, contractual arrangements. The one that captured my attention the most. The agreement that linked his most profitable venture to my initial capital. I picked it up, perusing the well-known legal terminology. This document served as the undeniable evidence of my role as the financial foundation of his entire empire. Morgan believed her son was the family's outstanding entrepreneur. But what would it be like without my presence? He was insignificant. I snapped a quick picture of the contract and then returned it precisely to its original spot. It was unnecessary to take it. Not when I had everything I required. Subsequently, I made my way to the bedroom. I opened a suitcase and started to pack my belongings. Not in fury, not in rush, but with complete understanding. This was not a decision driven by emotion. This was a deliberate exit. As Adam stepped through the front door, I was already settled on the couch, suitcase beside me, patiently waiting. He lingered in the doorway, gazing at me as if he questioned whether he had returned to the correct home. Is that you, Claire? I inclined my head. It certainly took a while. His gaze flicked to the suitcase, his breath hitching in his throat. What are you up to? I rose, composed and steady. Departing. Adam's lips parted ever so slightly, yet silence enveloped him. Your decision is final, Adam. I spoke with a calm demeanor. Over at the restaurant. When your mother embarrassed me, once more. And you simply remained in your seat. His jaw tightened. I aim to maintain harmony. I chuckled. Tranquility? Adam, your mother orchestrated this whole dinner just to put me in an awkward position. She made a reservation and intentionally excluded me from it. She hurled an insult my way. She attempted to create an atmosphere where I felt out of place. I moved in a bit, observing how he seemed to diminish under my stare. And you allowed her to do that? As you consistently managed to do. He rubbed the back of his neck, a clear sign of his agitation. It's intricate, Claire. You're aware of her nature. I exhaled softly. Absolutely not, Adam. It's straightforward. You lack strength. His gaze shot to mine, filled with indignation. Yet, it was indeed the truth. Throughout our marriage, it feels as though your mother has had a significant influence on how you interact with me. I exhibited patience, Adam. I offered you countless opportunities. However, this evening? I gently shook my head. This evening, I truly recognized you for who you are. Adam gulped nervously. Claire, we need to have a conversation about this. I let out a deep breath. That is the issue, Adam. All discussions have come to an end. I grabbed my suitcase and walked by him without a word. As I approached the door, I will stand my ground on this matter. I pivoted. Excuse me? Adam's expression grew somber, his tone subdued. If you believe you can exit this marriage with half of what you own, you're in for a surprise. I gazed at him for a brief moment before breaking into a smile. Oh, Adam, I murmured gently. It would be wise to examine your contracts with greater attention to detail. A look of bewilderment crossed his features. Excuse me? I interrupted him. You wouldn't possess even a fraction of what you have without my influence. Your investments were built using my funds. Can you believe it? I allowed the moment to linger. I possess all the necessary documentation to substantiate it. His face lost all its color. I moved in a bit, softening my tone. I allowed you to take a loan from me, Adam. I allowed you to create something with it. What about now? A smile graced my lips. I desire its return now. Adam stumbled backward, the truth crashing down on him in a single moment. Did he really believe he could intimidate me? He was completely unaware of the magnitude of the person he was up against. Adam lingered in the doorway, his complexion ashen, his jaw tight with tension. The instant the understanding dawned on him was unmistakable. I wasn't merely walking away from him. I was seizing all that he believed he had dominion over. He parted his lips, likely to dispute, to plead, to attempt to sway me as he consistently did. Yet, I failed to offer him the opportunity. I'll be residing in the penthouse, I remarked, shifting the strap of my bag over my shoulder. His brows knitted together. Which penthouse are you referring to? I smiled, my head tilting ever so slightly. Oh, Adam, the one you believe you possess. I observed as bewilderment morphed into dread. The penthouse in the heart of downtown? He inquired, his voice wavering. The one that I purchased in my name? Indeed, I expressed that with a certain fluidity. Earlier today, I had my attorney examine the ownership documents. It was never meant for you, Adam. His nostrils expanded. You would not. I have already completed that. I delved into my bag and retrieved an envelope, casually tossing it onto the counter. He paused, uncertainty flickering in his gaze as he glanced over the legal document nestled within. His hands trembled. This? He gulped. This indicates that you possess 51% ownership of my investment firm. I gave a slight nod. Is that right? His breath became shallow. That can't be done. I simply shrugged. Not quite. I was the first one to invest, don't you recall? I have not transferred ownership to you. You simply presumed I did, because, after all, it seems you didn't take the time to go through the contracts, did you? I observed the panic etching itself across his face, his thoughts swirling in a frenzy, likely questioning how on earth he had allowed this to unfold. Claire. He spoke, his voice strained. This cannot simply be taken from me. A smile graced my lips. I'm not accepting anything. I possess it already. He reeled backward, clutching the counter tightly. This was the man who had allowed his mother to bring me shame. Who had remained there in fearful silence as she attempted to take away my dignity. At this moment? At that moment, he found himself utterly devoid of power. I'm having trouble grasping this. He whispered under his breath. What is the reason? What is the reason behind this action? For the first time in years, I experienced a profound sense of liberation, an unmistakable freedom that enveloped me. Because Adam, I declared, I have finally recognized my value. With that, I pivoted and exited the house. For the final time. A month later, I found myself in the penthouse, legs elegantly crossed, a glass of champagne delicately held in my hand. My attorney sat across from me, a smile on her face as she pushed the finalized divorce papers in my direction. "It's official. You are liberated." I breathed out gently, gliding my fingers across the textured surface of the heavy paper. Complimentary. The last few weeks had been a flurry of activity. The courtroom clash? Concise and harsh. Adam had made an effort to resist, naturally. He burst into meetings, insisted on a more favorable arrangement, and warned of legal action. However, when my attorneys presented the evidence confirming my status as the rightful majority shareholder in his company, his arrogance crumbled. Morgan attempted to step in. She had reached out to me. Enraged. Labeling me as a deceitful opportunist. I merely replied, if you had nurtured him properly, this situation could have been avoided. After that, I decided to block her number. Morgan Sinclair was no longer my concern. I raised the champagne glass to my lips, relishing the experience. And then, as if fate had a final chuckle in store for me, my phone buzzed. "Adam, may we have a conversation?" I smiled slyly, placing the glass aside and responding with a few keystrokes. "What about me?" A moment of stillness. Then, "Adam, I'm at a loss for what to do." I let out a breath, my head shaking slowly. It was truly disheartening. For years, I held on to the hope that Adam would finally reveal himself, becoming the man I believed I had married. I had hoped he would finally confront his mother, to defend me as fiercely as I had defended him. But now, I perceived him for precisely what he truly was. A man who had devoted his existence to lurking in the shadows of others' strength, too feeble to create anything of his own. What a twist of fate. He required my presence now more than at any other time. However, I found that I didn't require him in any way. I composed one last message. That's no longer my concern. Subsequently, I also blocked his number. For the very first time, I was prioritizing my own needs and desires. That was the most impactful action I had ever taken.